I just wanted to say, yep. So thank you for those who are joining. This is the Hacking HR Future of Wellness and Wellbeing at Work. I'm Manny, Lara. I'm the moderator for this session. And we just want to thank everyone for joining us, and also Hacking HR, Enrique Rubio, Heidi Glickman, to get this all organized and get us going. And we have a great set of panelists today. And in alphabetical order, I'd like to have them introduce themselves, share their title, the organization they work for, briefly what that organization does, and then we'll just go round robin. So, before I go there, I'll introduce a little bit of my background. I'm a 15-year HR professional in the healthcare industry, and I actually just started a health tech app called RxECIPES. We're working to create some food literacy and education in some of the communities here. We're really early stage, so we're just getting this started and see where it goes. So, and then I'll throw it to Rachel next in alpha order. So, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm Rachel Druckenmiller, and I'm the founder and CEO of Unmuted. And what I do is I work with leaders. I'm a speaker and a trainer, and I work with them on the developing human skills and self-care. So that intersection between what we often call soft skills and self-care, so that they can thrive at work and at home. So, and I've been in the industry wellness industry for 13 years. So I'm excited for the conversation.
MaryBeth.
Good morning, everyone. I'm MaryBeth Hyland. I am the founder and chief visionary of SparkVision. I've had my organization now for almost 5 years, and it really came to life as a result of developing a national best practice model for engaging young people. So I specialize in working across the generations, and my expertise is really around values. So how do you use your organization's values and the values of the individuals within your company to really help to create a compass and guardrails to understand what is the environment and the behaviors that are going to enable people to have a healthy workplace experience every day. I'm also extremely excited to be here. I'm so proud to be a part of Hacking HR and welcome everyone to this wonderful conversation.
Thanks, MaryBeth. And then Nancy?
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Nancy Vitali, and I'm a senior human resources leader with a passion for well-being and direct experience in incorporating well-being into company culture. One of my most recent roles was as the CHRO for a very large Bay Area biotech company. But last year, I co-founded Partners for Wellbeing, which is a boutique consulting firm that's dedicated to integrating well-being into company cultures to enable their people to be at their best and perform at their best. And like Rachel and MaryBeth and Manny, super excited to have everyone, and welcome.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. And we had a little time to coordinate ourselves around this term of wellness and well-being. I know it's a broad term. There's a lot involved with it. We each have our own unique involvement with that. And certainly as an HR professional, you know that as you work with staff and leaders, that wellness for your staff is so important, more so, I think, these days than ever. And collectively, as we were trying to determine what does that mean for us, we took a little bit of each of our perspective, and this is what we've defined collectively as well. Wellness and well-being is a journey towards wholeness through connections and community, fulfillment, what makes us happy, personal growth, mind and body, and necessary resources that align to an organization's core values, so everyone can be seen, heard, and valued. So that's a lot of information there. So, I think we want to kind of pick that apart and see what is it that we each kind of take from that. What does that mean to you, respectively? Anyway, so maybe go around to say from that term, what is it's a lot there. So from your areas, what do you think that? I mean, how does that apply to you? Maybe start with you, Nancy, as you. Might be interested in sharing that. So,
sure. So what I would say is, even in this last year, as I've been steeped more in this space, when I talk to folks about what I'm doing, they tend to go to, when I say well-being, they go to the wellness space. And historically, that has meant the physical and mental elements of well-being. And I think that's much more a narrowly defined or singular focus on what we're trying to achieve with this topic and where we're going with wellness and well-being in the future. So I really try to broaden the aperture and think more holistically about those things that contribute to us being at our best. And you've touched upon some of those elements, Manny, and what you and MaryBeth and Rachel and I were conversing about previously. But for me, it does get at these elements of fulfillment and this notion that what we do each day, how are we contributing? How are we impacting others? And how does that bring us satisfaction and happiness? It's this notion of human connection and the quality of the relationships that we have in our lives as a source of well-being. It's about financial wellness. Yes, it's about mind and body health and the energy to do the things we want to do. But it's also about being actively engaged in the communities where we live and work. So I think for organizations and companies, it's thinking much more broadly about their culture and the mechanisms that they enable people to invest in their well-being, much more broadly beyond just physical and mental health.
That's great. Anyone else want to share a little bit from their perspective, maybe how you see health or wellness and well-being?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I mentioned earlier in my introduction that I specialize in values, and I think that values can often, particularly for a company, feel like a branding or a marketing exercise. So that's not to say that there's anything wrong with having a marketing team help you with that kind of work. But if they are simply a poster on your wall professing the things that you claim to believe in, the things that you claim to matter, the things that are supposedly at the core of what makes you unique and special and an organization where people want to be, but that's not actually how you behave, it creates an incredible disconnect within an organization. So when an organization can be intentional about defining their values based on the people within their company, the things that already motivate those individuals, what is intrinsically within them, and then figuring out, okay, how does that overlay with our organization and what makes us unique as a company so that we can be intentional about this. It creates a very different relationship with values versus, oh, here are just some words that seem to be buzzwords in our industry right now. There's so many people who say innovation is one of their values, but then you go into their company and you say, tell me the last time you were able to be innovative. And people will start sharing stories about how they were told they were entitled when they brought up a new idea, or somebody shut them down immediately and said, there's nothing wrong with the way we've been doing this. So when you are out of alignment with those values in the way that an organization behaves, it creates a discord within the people that are working there. It creates a sense of disconnect. And when you are in alignment, so if you had that same value of innovation and there were opportunities to constantly present new ideas, and there were maybe even competitions around how you could hack through various things that weren't working for the organization and need to be done differently, that creates an incredible sense of purpose, alignment, intention, pride, loyalty, engagement, so many things, because we often don't recognize that as human beings, we are a walking, talking, living, breathing set of values. And when we don't honor those things and we just act like they're just some kind of marketing piece of collateral on the wall, we're really losing the opportunity to evolve in the human experience at work. And so that's really the frame that I use when I'm talking about wellness in an organization. It's how aligned are you with your behaviors and your values?
That's great. Yeah, great perspective. So, and then Rachel, if you could share more from Unmuted's perspective around what wellness means for your organization and employees.
Yeah, so, I've seen an evolution. I started in this industry in 2007 and have seen, to what Nancy pointed out, the shift from just physical stuff, basically like the burpees and broccoli wellness, to moving into a focus on what helps people thrive. So if we were to focus really on what the goal of well-being strategies are in an organization, it's figure out what can we do to support people so that they can thrive at work and at home. Like very simply, that's what it is. And depending on the industry, depending on the life stage of somebody, depending on the demands of their job, that's going to look different for different people. And with the epidemic of loneliness that we have in our culture right now, with this epidemic of, as MaryBeth mentioned, disconnection, we have a state where people don't necessarily feel like they matter. They don't necessarily feel like people at their organization are listening to them. They don't necessarily feel like they're getting recognized or appreciated for the work that they're doing. And they are being led by managers that, I think this was a number from Gallup, that Gallup said that only about 10% of people in management positions should be managing, like have the skills inherently to do that. So we have a tremendous opportunity to shift the conversation from trying to fix people, which is where wellness has been for so much of its lifespan, of how do we get people to be healthy, to shifting more toward this idea of how do we support people to thrive, and how do we help to train up leaders so that they understand what it means to lead people in a way that makes them feel like they matter. And at the end of the day, when people feel that way, when people feel like they matter, when they feel like they're cared for by their organization, these other areas of their health and well-being will become more important and will be elevated because they have some of those basic needs at work met. So I really am excited to see where the industry is going, because we've been in a place that has been pretty judgmental. I think in terms of our approach to wellness and how we talk about it with people at work. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to continue to happen as we keep focusing on the whole person and focus on this idea of thriving instead of fixing.
I think you've all touched on a really kind of that holistic approach. Like you each have a particular area that you're focusing on that bring it all together. I think that is about that whole person, right? So it's not only the physical, it's the socioeconomic, so it's the financial, it's the connections, the social, the values, being able to voice those values. And my approach is, being from the healthcare area, it's been a lot about, on the, unfortunately healthcare is about sick care. You're managing disease and chronic illness. And so my effort has been trying to get ahead of that. So I know that more people are more conscious about what they put in their bodies, what they eat. I mean, myself, I've gone through that journey myself and seen the results. And so I think that mine is probably much more rudimentary around the physical health. But I do think that there's absolutely, you see it in the workforce around the lack of connection, the lack of social, the concerns about, monetary, money, financial concerns. Those all weigh on somebody, and not being their best self when they come to work. And we also, I think there's also been this divide of keep work at work and home at home, right? And that's been a barrier. And I think folks, frankly, it goes back to the leadership discussion of sometimes leaders don't want to have that discussion because they're afraid of what the answer they're going to get. And then now I've got to do something with it. Now I've got to resource that or something. And so I think that's where that engagement, those organizations that are more progressive and flip that around, hey, you've got to take care of your people. We've got to have open dialogue. And we do have resources. If we don't have them, we find the right people to find those resources. But I do think that we've always kept it at bay because there's always that concern of merging the two. And I think more so now, and if you look at, some of the studies by Manpower, they're going out more globally to talk about things around, the one workplace, the merger of like, hey, you pretty much, you're fluid in and out of work. Your home and work life start to meld a little bit, and people are doing work from sporting events or remote or what have you. So how do you help support this future of work through wellness and well-being? So I don't know if that adds more value or not, but I do think I like everyone's kind of approach to like, hey, this is more than just eating broccoli and exercising, right? So the other thing a couple of statistics. So I pulled this from the Global Wellness Institute, and the global wellness economy is right now at a $4.5 trillion market. So basically, wellness and well-being companies and organizations are widely spending on this effort, and it's continued to grow at about 6% increase every year. They expect it to be 6.6 trillion by 2022. Yet we're not any healthier, and we're actually getting worse. And some of the statistics I see here is that 18% of the labor force, they're growing older and unhealthy, less healthy. That 74% continue to face financial challenges. 45% work in low skill or manual occupations. 76% are struggling or suffering in their physical well-being. And about stress and unhappiness, 38% suffer from excessive pressure on the job. 2.3 million there are $2.3 million of annual work-related deaths attributed to some of the things related to safety, wellness, stress, and then 313 million annual work-related accidents. So I think what are your thoughts on what is it that we're not doing correctly, and from each of your perspectives around why we keep spending more but we're not seeing any more return? What's missing?
Well, I would say one of the.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Go ahead, Rachel. Yeah.
Okay, so I would say one of the primary issues, gotta love technology, is that it's still siloed. So wellness and well-being, in terms of how we talk about it at work, it's still a program.
Yeah.
And so as long as it's a program and it's not a systemic change, we're going to still deal with the same stuff. So what I see happen, and one of the things I've said before, and I know MaryBeth and I have had this conversation, and it's something that I really firmly believe, is that most wellness programs are an apology for what work has become. So when I say that, I mean that in a lot of cases where people are stressed out, they're drinking excessively, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're not physically well, they're relationally disconnected, they're not performing well at work. And so we're like, stress is an issue. Let's bring in chair massages. And I love a massage as much as anybody else does. I love massages, but it's not a massage deficit that's happening at work. That's not why workplaces aren't okay. And that's why people aren't well, because they have a massage deficiency. So I really think more than anything, we have to have a primary conversation about what's the cost of doing nothing? What's the cost of staying in this state and basically treating wellness as this ancillary thing that if we have some extra money left over at the end of the year, we'll give people apples. When we talk about the initial conversation we had about expanding well-being to be something that encompasses someone's whole person, I think it begins by getting curious and asking your people instead of making assumptions. One of the things organizations are often not doing is going to their people and saying, what is something that we could do to make your life better or easier in some way? And at my former company, that question was asked at an all hands meeting, and people came up with everything from, I need help organizing, I need help managing technology with my teenagers, I need help with financial planning, I need help meal planning. It ran the gamut. And those were not things that we would have necessarily assumed people needed help with. So I think it starts with taking wellness out of this siloed thing on the side and having it be something that is integrated into every conversation, the policy decisions we're making, the processes we're coming up with. Does this support or compromise well-being? Does this support or compromise well-being? To ask those questions. And I think if we started there, that organizations would make very fundamentally different decisions about what they do. And I think we would be able to position employees in such a way that they would have a voice. Part of being unmuted means having a voice to speak up and to speak out about the things that they need and the things that they matter in order for them to thrive.
Yeah, great points. And I've seen that kind of cookie cutter approach organizations take to wellness. They say we've got to kind of offer everyone the same thing, and like you said, it may be missing the mark. It may be more customized or individual, or my life stages are different for other people. So I think the organizations have to be more progressive on what they're asking their staff around wellness and well-being. So yeah. And Nancy, you wanted to share some as well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with how Rachel framed kind of the challenge here. And it reminded me of Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeffer and his book, Dying for a Paycheck, and the role that employers and companies are playing in making us, less well instead of a source of well-being. But I think when you look at this from an HR lens, one of the challenges that organizations have is when they approach wellness to solve two problems fundamentally. And this is how we've historically looked at well-being and wellness. One is to decrease healthcare costs or medical claim costs. And this notion of what can I do to either incent or disincent certain behaviors that will directly decrease my cost. I think the other problem that we've looked to wellness to solve, and Rachel kind of highlighted this, is to increase our employee value proposition through enhanced offerings as we try to compete, in this war for talent. How can I be more competitive by the perks and benefits that I'm offering to enhance my value proposition? And once again, I think that comes at it just from the sole perspective, this narrow view, this siloed view that Rachel was talking about, from a pure benefits, perspective. But more, you see, more progressive organizations looking at this from the point of view of how do I think about my company culture and how it enhances, how it amplifies the well-being of my people versus diminishing the well-being of my people. And this is exactly what Rachel was getting to. So in that sense, you have to, take a look at the environment, the organizational norms. This is a much more challenging and comprehensive and complicated question or problem that you're trying to solve. But to that end, you don't have to go it alone, right? It's not the benefits team's sole responsibility to address these needs. It's the entire kind of human resources team, from learning and development to analytics to talent acquisition, working with their partners in employee health and safety, in facilities, in communications and corporate relations. But at the heart, it gets to the role that managers and leaders play. These other support, organizations, what do they do to facilitate or enable or provide the mechanisms and create the conditions that enable people to invest, in their well-being? But it's really gets down to the individual manager and leader role in carrying that through. So how do we bust those silos, to Rachel's point, and how do we think more broadly about the problem we're trying to solve?
No, that's great.
I totally agree. No surprise here. We're a bunch of like-minded folks on this in this panel, and I really appreciate Rachel uses that phrase quite often about it being an apology, right? Wellness programs being an apology, and in sort of building on what the two of them have already said, that notion of that disconnect of saying you care about something and then acting differently. That is such a huge piece of why these people are feeling like they're in toxic environments, why people are feeling like they're being taken advantage of, or they don't matter, they don't feel like they're cared for. And so even something as simple as a hospital system creating an incentive for your employees to fill in the blank, right? If walk more steps or live more in alignment with your values or whatever it might be. And then the incentive is a pizza party. I kid you not, this is like, I see this all the time, that the incentive is something that goes against what the whole point of this is in the first place. And then when you talk about, well, what's the reasoning? What's the rationale behind doing that? It's cost. It's like, well, it's way more effective for us to do multiple pizza parties. And so then I have to have the conversation around, well, then maybe there should just be one, and it should not be a pizza party, right? Instead of trying to spread this out to as many people as possible. So it's really fascinating how many institutions proclaim that they really care about specific things, but then in their behaviors, it's showing up very differently. And I actually want to give a shout out to the people who are participating in watching this, because it has been the most beautiful demonstration of what it looks like when people are listening and paying attention and actually care about other people's ability to participate. So there have been people saying, I can't hear, I can't, I'm not seeing things, I don't know what to do. And multiple people have stepped up and said, try this browser, try this other thing. This is a perfect little petri dish of what it looks like in an environment where people are looking out for others' well-being. But it starts with people feeling safe to say, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm not able to make this work. Can somebody help me? And that's really step one, having that psychological, emotional safety to be able to say, this isn't working for me, because so many people are just in fear of being able to even have their job if they speak up about things that are creating a disconnect within themselves. So kudos to the group of folks that are participating in this experience, because it's been so cool to just watch people take care of each other in the chat in this very basic, simple thing. But it is these very basic, simple things that add up over time in making people feel like they matter, and it matters that they're able to participate.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And just working for big corporations and health systems, and that we all have to look out for each other too. Like your colleagues. I think sometimes folks, they keep the distance because they don't want to get into anyone's business, or so it's challenging at times. But I think sometimes, we recognize when there are issues with each other, and we should be asking, hey, is everything okay? Or hey, what can I do to help? Offering that, and we're seeing that certainly on the, like you said, the chat line. And I always think about the quote that comes up to me is the Mr. Rogers quote when they asked, during a crisis, look for the helpers, right? Those are the people that are running to help others. And I think that's where we're at these days, certainly in the workforces. There's a lot of crisis around workplace wellness and well-being, and who are the helpers? Who are the ones coming forward? My background prior to healthcare was in the military, and we had a nice saying of take care of your people and your people will take care of you. And I think it's so true as a leader that you have to take care of your people. And it's not necessarily, from my perspective, it's not a lot of times giving them necessarily what they want, but what they need. At times it might be, somebody might not be, what they need might be some coaching, might be some time away, or whatever it might be. Just trying to find out what's going on there, and to take care of your folks. So I do think that, like you said, it's a very dynamic workforce. I'd love to shift into what your thoughts are about what we're going to be challenged with. What our employers are going to be challenged with wellness and well-being. What our employees will be expecting, especially from now millennials getting older into leadership positions, and now Gen Z entering the workforce. Different, maybe as you can see, different values, different expectations, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on what you anticipate happening in this wellness and well-being space. So, MaryBeth, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. So I am, in addition to a workplace culture consultant, I am a meditation and mindfulness teacher as well. And one of the things that I am the most excited about right now is we are in a time of incredible adoption and shifting in believing in the value of concepts like mindfulness and meditation. So for anybody who's new to that concept, mindfulness is really just about being able to be in the present moment. So not thinking about what you didn't get done yesterday or what you have to do tomorrow, but being able to be conscious and present in this very moment. And oftentimes companies are so pushed on productivity and checking boxes and how much volume can we do that we miss out on how incredibly powerful it is to be mindful and to slow down. Because what happens is when you're being pushed to just do more, it's the kind of thing that you ultimately have more errors, more issues, more burnout, people just struggling, suffering, and surviving through situations. Whereas something as simple as taking a moment, I use a tool called an energy chime. You can get them anywhere. And just taking a moment before a meeting, to ring a bell and have everybody close their eyes and breathe and set their intention for what they want to accomplish in that meeting, that has totally changed the dynamics of regular day-to-day meetings that don't necessarily have a lot of pressure on them to experiences where I'm mediating a toxic experience within a company. And it's amazing what happens when we just take, and that's like maybe 30 seconds. And I've been in this space for about 5 years, as I mentioned earlier, and it's only been in the last year that I have felt empowered to not ask permission to bring out tools like energy bells and walk people through guided meditations to figure out where they're holding the stress in their body. And companies I have found, I'm not necessarily saying this is what you're going to get when you hire me, but when they have that experience and they see, oh, we can do something as simple as taking deep breaths and setting an intention for a meeting and have a completely different experience in the meeting. And it doesn't cost us anything unless we choose to invest in the $20 chime, right? Like, it is amazing how massive those shifts are and how many companies are really embracing these concepts. So not only are they having experiences where they're slowing down to get ahead and checking in with each other on what they want to do and what their intentions are before moving forward, but also a lot of places are having things like mindfulness and meditation spaces within their offices. But this is where it goes back to some of the comments that were made earlier. You can't just set up a meditation room in your office and say, check, we do that now. Because there are so many CEOs who have said to me, we set up this really great mindful space and no one's using it. I don't understand why no one's using it. And so my first question is, when's the last time you used it? And almost every single time they say, well, I don't need it. I don't need to use it. And I said, well, there's the problem. There's the problem. There's the opportunity. I encourage you to use it when the most traffic is going to be moving by that space, where the most people can see you do it, and then talk about what your experience was like after doing it. Because just because you have a space to be able to engage in those kinds of concepts doesn't mean that people have that, going back to that safety of feeling like this is actually valued and this is actually embraced within our organization. But I'm finding that the companies who are doing that, or at least are on a journey to do that, are finding incredible results in people feeling more connected to themselves, deeper sense of alignment, deeper sense of well-being, and more balance in that work-life fitness, not even balance. Like, how can you slow down? Because you do bring all of your stuff everywhere you go, right? It, like we said earlier, it's not this, I'm this person when I'm at home, I'm this person when I work. Those things are with you. You might not be talking about them, but they're still with you. So when you can take those moments to be more present and to slow down, which I'm finding is a huge trend, particularly in the organizations I'm working with, that they are finding massive results. And it really is something as simple as 30 seconds.
So MaryBeth, do you help those leaders kind of role model them to say, hey, your people aren't using that because they don't see you using that. And as much as you encourage them, I think you have to role model what's okay in the organization, correct? And
people just assume people know what it means to be mindful and to meditate. And so if there aren't any resources or trainings or places where people can go to learn how to use the room, it oftentimes gets used as like a place for people to take phone calls, right? Private.
Or somebody wrote a nap. Somebody's napping in one of those rooms.
Right, which I'm not against napping, right? As long as it's done in a way that's intentional, right? It's not like done because I'm going here to hide. If you're allowed to meditate for 20 minutes, it's equivalent to napping in many ways, getting that same kind of refresh within your body. But it has to be done with intention, right? And choice, not like I'm going here to just like fall out because there's nowhere else for me to do that.
Right.
That's great. Yeah. And any Nancy or Rachel we'll go around. I think Rachel can probably go next about just we're delving into what the future of wellness well-being will be and what employers should expect, how they should be looking at the wellness component differently, what our employees will expect of us as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost that, again, expanding that definition, there's a research from Gallup that shows that people who are thriving in career well-being, so have opportunity, they have a sense of purpose, they have opportunities to learn and grow and contribute, that they are twice as likely to be thriving in all other areas of well-being. So I think that looking at career well-being and social emotional health, as we've been alluding to, is the future. And with the student debt crisis, what it is, and frankly, the credit card debt crisis, what it is, my mother's a financial planner, so I feel like I have to mention this, that financial well-being is becoming more prevalent because most people never learned how to manage their money.
Right. And the amount of school debt that's out there too.
And
right. Sorry.
Yeah, it's debilitating. People can't start their lives. You know, it's really debilitating. And so, you know, when I think about what the future is, I think it's a move away from this very compliance focused approach to wellness that's like do this or else right. to something that is more collaborative with people, again, of what do you need and how can we support you. And I think it's going to be more embedded and integrated. And one of the things that we've been, you know, talking about, the idea of balance and integration, I heard a phrase the other day that I really liked of it's work-life harmony. So how do we create work-life harmony? Because at the end of the day, your devices are with you everywhere. And I think one of the things that organizations can do very simply, as MaryBeth was alluding to, things that are free, people really like, have boundaries around using devices. Because what happens in meetings, people walk into a meeting, everyone's looking down at their phone. They're not having a conversation. A very simple thing you could do is, I know Simon Sinek promotes this, having like a bin outside of the room where people put their phones. And when you go into the room, there's an expectation that you're going to make eye contact with people, and you're not so important that you can't miss your email for 5 minutes, and you're going to have a conversation with another human being. Because when we connect and spend time together, that's what builds trust. And if we're always too busy to even make eye contact, that's a problem. And so a simple thing that people can do is to even do something at the beginning of a meeting where they let someone share a picture about something that's important to them, you know, in their life. And I've talked about this at several different conferences I've spoken at. And one of the women followed up with me after, and she said, oh my gosh, we did this at our company. She works at a construction company. She's like, we did this, and the crazy thing happened. These two guys who've worked together for years were paired up together. And one of them shared a picture of the last place that he took his son before his son unexpectedly passed away. And the other one shared a picture of the place where he spread his best friend's ashes. And they were the same place.
Wow.
And you think about the level and depth of connection that was experienced in a matter of 2 to 3 minutes that we miss because we're too busy. We're not, if you're too busy to take 2 to 3 minutes, you got to find some other way to prioritize your life.
Right.
Because I guarantee with as much time as we all spend on social media, binge watching Netflix, you have 2 to 3 minutes to connect with somebody. It doesn't have to be like this intensive thing. It's the little things. It's always with any behavior change, with any habit change, it's the accumulation of small things that lead to a bigger change. It's not that everyone has to make over every area of their life overnight. That's not sustainable. That's not effective. But when we focus on these little, kind of like these micro moments of connecting with people in meaningful ways, those are the things that lead to what we're all after, which is, again, this deeper level of connection and thriving. So I see organizations really kind of, as digital as things are, of getting back to some more basic ways of connecting, more fundamental ways of connecting with each other.
I think it goes to vulnerability too, right? So being vulnerable to share something that's that intimate, right? You don't know who you're going to touch or connect with. And it's really hard, I think, because people do feel, can I be my whole self at work? Can I share those things? And I think it's on leadership to be able to role model that as well, even more so to say it's okay. And we're going to be the ones that step into this space and lead this and role model it and then we want this then to cascade down to frontline level, and then turn it over to them so they run it. So I think that's where I've seen success, is certain areas where the leader has stood up, and as vulnerable as they might be, they're willing to share and willing to be, to engage their staff around those things. So, that's where I see this all starts, is leadership. So, and Nancy, what would your take be on, from a values perspective, organizational values perspective, or what changes you might see for organizations to now start to embrace around wellness and well-being as well?
Yeah, well, I think about this in terms of where are companies entering this decade of the 2020s, and both Rachel and MaryBeth touched upon some of these challenges, but in terms of the employees, the candidates that are entering the workforce, that are in the workforce, we think about the impact of technology and this always-on connectivity. So technology can be a great source of enabling us to be connected in a distributed work environment, but it can also create this demand and expectation of always being on and always being connected in terms of my responsibilities to the organization. And then we think about the impact of things like social media. Social media is a great thing from where are my networks? But from a distraction, I'm always getting pinged or noticed, or it provides a constant distraction, or the stories that I see in social media are by and large the positive ones. And that's just not reality in terms of what people's day-to-day lives and the challenges and stresses and failures and heartbreak that they go through. So thinking about the impacts to our people, from social media and technology. And I think Rachel touched upon this too, when we think about financial wellness and other elements. Our educational institutions don't train on or teach people about life skills. It's just something that is absent when they enter the workforce. And so it puts a lot of pressure on organizations to fill that void and to help people, with their life skills. And so, bring this to the large percent of millennials we have in the workplace today. When we think about Gen Z and we think about that impact, their demands and expectations with this as a backdrop are also increasing in terms of what can I expect, from my company. And I think what both MaryBeth and Rachel pointed to is, how can organizations normalize not only the conversation, but how can they enable the investment of small little things, habits, different things that really enhance, and it doesn't take a large investment. I'll give you one example, and I'll build upon the last thing that Rachel said in terms of how can an organization or an employer really help enable that human connection and the connectivity that people have in their relationships. And my last employer, our employee resource group, the Women's Professional Organization, really was influenced by Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book and Lean In Circles. And they wanted to really enable these support groups, and they started with their constituents in the Women's Professional Organization, but it really grew as these pods that they self-ran and self-facilitated with that cut across all of our employee resource groups, quite honestly. And so in groups of 8 people, once a month, people would come together, which started as, how can we talk about our professional and career challenges, but over time grew to be people really opening up in these intimate settings about their personal and professional challenges. And they would meet once a month over a 6-month period of time for 90 minutes. But in that simple mechanism, these relationships and bonds were formed, so that even when those pods were disbanded, people had peers that they could call on when they had an issue, a challenge, a question, or we're going through a difficult time. So I think, to the point of, you can have zero to low cost investments that organizations can make to really enhance the well-being of their people. And a lot of times, to Rachel's earlier point, I do think this focus on human connection and social well-being, and this notion of how do organizations enable fulfillment, I'll give you one last statistic. There's an organization called Imperative, and they've written several white papers on this notion of fulfillment as well as human connection. And what they found was that only 1% of people in life were fulfilled who were not fulfilled at work, meaning it is really difficult to be fulfilled in life without being fulfilled at work. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on employers, but it's also a huge opportunity in terms of the impact that they can have on their people.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, and it crosses over to, like you said, the organizations being more aware and involved with that work-life integration, that harmony, because they cross over. I mean, things are changing where you can't tell the difference between work and home life nowadays. It kind of melds together. So I think employers have to be more aware of those things. One of the things that I'm curious about, if anyone has some insights, is I know a lot of times when you introduce a wellness program, there's always an ask about cost, right, within the organization. How are you able to justify like the works that you've done around either metrics or KPIs or productivity measures? I don't know if anyone can speak to those yet or not, and does it matter as much, I guess? So.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's worth asking the question, is this an investment? Like, why are we doing this? I had a company I was working with a couple years ago, and they posed me with a very interesting challenge. They said, so we want you to create a 3-year strategy about how to create a culture of health here that is budget neutral.
Wow. Yeah.
I was like, all right, so you want to be a billionaire by the time you're 65 and not put any money in a 401k.
Yeah.
All right, let me figure out how I can do some voodoo magic here.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is for organizations to realize you're already spending the money. So for instance, something like turnover, the cost of turnover is 2 to 3 times an employee's salary.
Right.
You think about the expense of bringing on new talent, of going through recruiters, of paying for recruiters, of all the time it takes for different people in the organization to onboard somebody, and the impact on culture when somebody leaves, especially if they've not been there very long or if they've been there a long time, what's the impact on culture? So I think one of the things organizations could do, which is a little trickier in today's economy because the job market's so tight, but looking at your turnover rates, are people like voluntarily leaving, like percentage of people are voluntarily leaving, and do you know why? Looking at engagement surveys. So Quantum Workplace is the back end. They have their own stuff, but they're, for instance, the back end of a lot of the best place to work surveys. And so even if you don't think your organization is the best place to work, if you just want to start and get some data points, have your people participate, like have your company, all your employees would have to fill out, or a certain percentage, about 80%, I think, would have to fill out that survey if you want to be eligible for a best place to work. And at the very least, if you do something like that, you get some data back to give you an understanding of where people are struggling. Because a lot of leaders are in denial. A lot of leaders are like, our people are happy here. They're fine.
Yeah.
Like, we pay them well, right? And then they get the engagement report back and they're like, what? What's going on? They were clueless.
Even the exit surveys, right, that they get back, they say, hey, nothing was wrong. I just, relocating, or, whatever it is, but it's normally never the actual reason, right? So.
I think
so. Even doing more, a lot of organizations, just one more point, are doing more pulse surveys too, where they're checking in more consistently on a weekly or daily or monthly basis with their people to find out, how are you doing? Do you have the resources you need to do your job? Do you have the training and support you need to do your job? Is there anything else we can be doing for you? So I think a lot of it is just more of these, instead of just these one-off things that we do occasionally, to have this be more embedded into how the conversations we have with people on a consistent basis. But it's as Nancy alluded to earlier, it's beyond the ROI. It's more, what's the value of the investment in terms of retention, recruitment, engagement, performance, brand image. People at my former company were attracted to it. One of the reasons is because we had won a lot of best place to work awards. And so people saw that on social media and they're like, I want to work for a company that cares about being a great workplace. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than a lot of places.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think even, I'll add this, is I think your customers are expecting that as well. Whoever the organization serves, I don't know if a lot of organizations share their level of engagement with their staff as openly or not. But to say, I mean, if you are in that, and if you're in a good place, I mean, I think that's something you want to leverage from a marketing perspective, and to help your customers and clients know that people that work for you are taken care of, and they are engaged, and they're going to do the best they can for you as the customer, because the organization takes care of them. And I think we often miss that. We look at customers as different. We measure their engagement separate than the employees. I think these days consumers are becoming more diligent about social responsibility, corporate responsibility, and they may be asking those questions. I even hear from candidates that say, tell me why should I, because of the unemployment, they have choice. They say, why should I work for this organization? What's special? Like, what's the value proposition? And it throws recruiters off for a loop, because it's, there's maybe an audacity of like, hey, we're the biggest, we're the best. Why aren't you working for us? And it is shifting. I think a lot of generations or the generation coming in are asking those more diligent questions. So, but anyone else want to add to ROI or KPIs or anything like that, and to kind of close that out?
Maybe just to, okay.
So maybe we're starting.
I'll be quick. I think just to add to Rachel, two specific assessment tools or measures that people could consider. One is Gallup's Wellbeing Finder. They've been at this for multiple decades, and it's a great tool for both individuals to understand, but then, having a more aggregate look at what the organization's doing. And the other is Great Place to Work Institute. So these are the folks that run Fortune magazine's Best Places to Work list. And actually had the privilege of working with them recently to co-develop a well-being indicator, leveraging their decades of research around what does it take to be a great place to work for all, using their trust methodology. And to Rachel's point, they do have an pulsing technology and survey tool called Emprising. So these are just two potential resources for folks that might be interested to look further.
I'll just add really quickly that I think one of the things that makes this work so complex and so difficult to measure is that depending on the day, you're going to answer a well-being survey very differently. So if that morning you happen to have an experience that was really toxic, you're going to respond, hopefully, honestly, right, in reflection of that experience. A lot of times I've actually noticed that companies send out these surveys on days that are paydays, on days where there's a holiday party, on days where people are in a good mood.
Cooking the books.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's right. Hopefully people would still be able to answer honestly, but your emotional experience changes by the minute. It's not something that you can measure. It was this on Monday and now it's this on Friday, because we are complex human beings, and it's a very complicated thing to be able to say, this is how we've moved the metric, if we're being really holistic about the way that we're taking these things into account. So I would encourage people that in addition to data, that we are also looking at qualitative side of data, right? So instead of just quantitative, what's the qualitative side? So how can we start capturing these stories, being able to say this person is having a completely different life experience as a result of XYZ? That was something that we rolled out in this programming, right? It can be something as simple as that, what Rachel shared about sharing a picture, or because they're using a mindfulness room, or because they're setting intentions before their meetings. How are people feeling overall as a result of that, and what's different in their lives in a story, not just in a number? Because the reality is, I think very highly of Gallup and all of these other institutions that are doing these surveys. But I got to tell you, I work in lots of institutions that use these surveys, and they will ask questions like, how aware are you of the company's values? How much do you think that this organization behaves in these values? And they're getting high scores. So it's like, why am I there? Because the reality is, that's not actually the experience every day. People aren't actually behaving that way. They're answering that survey in that way because they think that's what they're supposed to do. And a lot of people actually have fear that there's some kind of tracking that they can go back and find who said what. I'm having this very conversation with a hospital system that I'm working with right now on their tracking and how there's a disconnect between how people are responding and what they're experiencing in the day-to-day. So be careful here, because I think sometimes we think quickly, oh, if we have a survey, if we have some kind of thing that says we were this and now we're that we can measure this in a way that's very cut and dry, and it's just not that simple.
Yeah, it's the snapshot.
Yeah. Can I add?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, I think to that point, to kind of combine everything we're saying, what's really helpful is if you are getting quantitative data, that you dig deeper through like a focus group discussion, that you bring together different people to say, okay, this came up, you know, and it has to be, you typically don't necessarily have HR in the room. It's unfortunate, but people don't necessarily trust HR still. They're afraid it's going to come back and bite them. So is there somebody who can be a trusted facilitator that can give the feedback? Because to MaryBeth's point, like, there's a lack of trust at most organizations that is affecting people's ability to be totally honest about anything. And so when you have something like a focus group, or you have a discussion, or even like quarterly manager check-ins for people to ask, you know, again, is there anything else that we could be doing to support you? Which relationship with your manager is not going to be helpful, but the thought of even doing like a follow-up discussion in the form of a conversation, if you have quantitative data, so you can dig deeper and find out what's behind the numbers. And were people actually honest? Because again, a lot of times there's pressure to feel like they have to lie.
Great points, everyone. We've got like 4 minutes, so I want to do like around the panel to see one takeaway you want to leave with the audience that folks should do. And so in like 30 seconds or so. So MaryBeth, if you want to start that, and I'll go to Nancy, and then I'll go to Rachel.
Sure. So my biggest takeaway would come back to values, which is this idea that when your behaviors are in alignment with your values, your organization has the ability to thrive. So be very intentional about what words you're choosing to describe what those values are, and how you're checking in with your people and the way you're making choices and your operations. Because if it's just a poster on the wall, it's never going to make a difference, and it's also going to create more frustration. So when you can really harness those values as a tool for alignment, you can create environments where everyone can thrive. Great point. Nancy, your take, one takeaway.
So I think, you know, for folks who are embarking on this journey, just building on the last conversation, to think about how they can assess the well-being of their people through these multiple mechanisms we talked about, and then inventorying what they're doing that either amplifies or diminishes the well-being of their folks. Just a short anecdote in this, I was having a conversation with a former colleague of mine who's struggled with his own mental health challenges. And we were talking about what organizations do, their norms, their practices, you know, large global organization where international business travel is expected on an ongoing basis, and the impact that can have, or the pressures from an organization norm perspective to answer emails, you know, over the weekends because you're always on and always connected. So just for folks that are embarking upon this journey to both assess and inventory what they're doing to either amplify or diminish, and to just start small and build from there.
And then thank you so much, Nancy. And then Rachel, last 2 minutes to share takeaway.
Yeah, so one of the things I'd suggest, and this was from the Great Places to Work site from Ariana Huffington, and one of the questions that she encourages people to ask their employees is, what's the most important thing in your life outside of work that helps you thrive? Like, to really find out from people, to understand what is it, you know. And the example she gave was there was a woman whose manager scheduled 7:30 a.m. meetings for her every day. And she really struggled to make these meetings. And so the manager had a conversation and asked that question, what's the most important thing outside in your life outside of work that helps you thrive? And she said, being able to take my daughter to school in the morning, and her school starts at 7:30 a.m. So a simple conversation led to a shift in a system that allowed the woman to both meet with her manager in the way that she needed to, but also prioritize the thing that was important to her, which was making sure that she was able to take her daughter to school. So I think if we made fewer assumptions and got more curious, asked more questions, and really did it out of a place of caring and not manipulation, people can tell the difference. If we really come to this with an intentionality of caring for people, of wanting to create a space where people feel like they're seen and heard and like they matter, that is the thing I believe is going to little by little by little by little, one of the things that's going to shift us in a positive direction.
I love all of those points. Thank you so much, panel. We're at time, but this is great. A lot of great comments, and we'll share more information later. So thank you, everyone. These are great.
Thank you.